I had just relocated my family to an older home much closer to my work. It was a large property with 4 bedrooms, a long horse corral, and a large tool shed in the backyard. There were also numerous fruit-bearing trees sprouting throughout the front yard, which the previous owner was in the business of selling. I counted 3 cherry trees, 5 pear trees, 5 apricot trees, 8 peach trees, and 1 apple tree. The realtor shared a newspaper with me, one headlining an article on the previous owner. I read the reported details of police searching for him after the body of his wife, who had been long reported missing, had been discovered, with strong evidence warranting his arrest. The news coverage of the event quickly declined the value of the house, making the realtor liable to share the information with me before buying. Not that I was concerned with the history of the home or its previous owners, just that I could afford it and move closer to my career. During the first several weeks of living at the house, I found very little time to myself, balancing work between setting up the house with all our furniture and belongings. We ended up ordering takeout every day after I realized I had misplaced the boxes of food I packed from our fridge in the old house. Then once we found it, all the perishables smelled so rancid that I just threw the entire box away, leaving us dependent on delivery food and, of course, the fruit trees out front. My kids loved the fruit, practically making a game out of picking from a different tree each day and deciding which one tasted the best. So far, they were pretty favorable to the tallest pear tree standing closest to the house. I could tell it was their favorite with the view from the kitchen window overlooking the entire yard, allowing me to see where they had placed the ladder each day to pick the fruit. And more often than not, it was set up directly under the branching out umbrella of the large pear tree. Eventually, they had both eaten and judged the fruit from all but one tree. The apple tree that stood just behind the mailbox, furthest from the house, was all that was left untouched. It was small and fairly premature looking, but seemed to produce a generous amount of large green apples. To be honest, I was actually eager to hear what my kids had to say about it. The apples looked so shiny and juicy, contrary to the fact that I couldn't yet try one myself, as I had promised my adamant kids that I would let them taste test the apples first. So for the sake of their healthy diet, I went with it. Though it wasn't easy with the ripe green apples hanging over my head every morning as I emptied the mailbox. The forbidden fruit would tease me until the morning my kids finally decided to move the ladder under the apple tree to pick from its branches. I was curiously waiting for their assessment inside when my daughter ran into the house and stuck her head into the sink to spit out a mouthful of apple. I came over to see what was going on when my son walked in holding a bushel of apples in his arms. He walked straight towards the garbage can with a sour look on his face and unloaded them before spitting in the trash and getting the taste out of his mouth. "What's wrong? Did you guys bite into a worm or something?" My daughter lifted her head out of the sink and said, "They're gross," with a disgusted frown. "It tastes like dirt," she said as she wiped off her mouth. My son just nodded in agreement while patting off his arms where the apples had touched. "Well, you probably just need to wash them," I tell them, thinking about all the dust I kick up pulling into the driveway each day and how much of it sprays onto the apples. They both give me a disagreeing look in return. Regardless, I pull one of the apples from the trash and run it under some water in the sink, wiping it down with my hands. I check it out, inspecting its shiny, light green tint as I dry it off on my shirt. Then I bite into it, wrapping my teeth as deep into it as I can and snap off a large chunk of it. I only chew for a few seconds before gagging and spitting it out into my hands as I drop the apple onto the kitchen floor. I quickly realized what my kids were talking about, though I felt it tasted a lot worse than dirt. It tasted like rot, and on top of that, it smelled something like sewage. I couldn't tell which aspect of it was worse. "Did you two actually pick these from off the tree?" I asked them, expecting them to tell me they had grabbed rotten apples that had fallen on the ground. We got them from as high as we could. I was halfway up the ladder, my daughter says in their defense. The apples on the ground smelled bad. I definitely believed her as I looked into the apple pieces in my hands and saw a blackened decay of what was the inside of the apple. I could still smell the stink coming off of it, holding my arms out away from my face to breathe. I slung the apple bits into the sink and turned on the garbage disposal before washing the residue off my hands. But they still smelled like rot, even after scrubbing with soap and a wire brush pad. I washed my hands several times before I finally gave up and just kept my hands away from my nose. I decided to go take another look at the tree, confident that I'll find a dead branch I hadn't noticed before, or something along the lines of that. What I instead find is a flourishing tree, rich with green apples, none of which seemed to look the least bit soured, and only a few of them had fallen under the tree to lay underneath it. Also still very lively looking. Only one of the fallen apples laid split open on the ground. I poked it around with my shoe, revealing the same blackened core as the one I bit into. The rancid smell filled the air as I turned it over and gusted the stench up. I blocked my nose with my arms as I jerked my head away, remembering to keep my hands far from my face. The smell was unbearable, even coming from a small piece of fruit sitting 6 feet away. I went back into the house and instructed my kids not to eat any of the fruit from that tree anymore. Of course, they had no problem abiding. I then took all the apples my son had tossed in the trash and started dropping them into the spinning garbage disposal, one by one. The smell was stronger than ever, but I bared through it until they were all completely down the sink. The smell seemed to follow me for the rest of the day, lingering late into the night, only to be waiting for me again the next morning. I took a long, hot shower, scrubbing my hands with any kind of soap I could find. Nothing worked. Never before in my life had I been stalked by a smell I couldn't wash away. Never before had I stepped out of a steaming shower directly to a sink for a follow-up hand washing. Still, it didn't dim the smell whatsoever. I cringed picking up the mail next to that tree, holding a rag over my mouth as I emptied the mailbox, glaring at the apples hung over my head. I knew that on the inside, each and every healthy-looking green apple was really black and rotten just beneath the skin. I couldn't imagine how the previous owner ever managed to make a living selling a single one of these disgusting things. I spent the whole day at work plagued by the rotten smell, unable to get anything accomplished beyond its distraction. It got so noticeable that my boss had to send me home early because of the stench, which was reason enough for me to drive directly home, pull up past the apple tree and into the driveway, and then walk back out, dragging the trash can behind me to pick the tree bare. Only after I was positive that every last apple had been tossed in the trash, I rolled it all out with the rest of the garbage. But even with the apples gone, the smell still didn't seem to lessen. The next morning I picked up the mail. I felt no relief from the stench at all. My kids even stood all the way across the dirt road to wait for the bus to avoid it. It was only a matter of time before the school called with a complaint about the odor. It wasn't long until I became so irritated that I couldn't take it. I couldn't go anywhere in the house to escape the smell. The walls themselves started to smell stained by the rot. Every door I opened would blow the rot in from the other side, and I couldn't take it anymore. I knew I had to do something about it. So I walked out back to the tool shed to find a solution. I soon stepped out, wielding a massive axe, and headed straight for the apple tree. I wasted no time swinging into the base of the tree, aiming as low to the ground as possible. I had no intention of leaving any remnant of this tree behind. Adrenaline flowed through my veins as I hurled the axe at the chipping wood over and over again until it was finally ready to tip over. Then, with an overpowered, fatal blow, I slammed the edge of the axe into the remaining neck of the tree, sending it crashing to the ground in a loud smack in the dirt. Once the dust had settled, all that was left of the tree was a short stump. So I wiped the sweat from my forehead and swung the axe again, now splitting the stump into pieces to break up out of the ground. I lift and swing the axe without slowing down until the wood is chipping away as splinters fly into the air with every impact. Then with the last powerful slam, I hear a deep crack of the stump snapping apart completely. And that's when the rotting smell horribly intensified. The axe slipped out of my loosening grip as I gasped in utter disgust. Laid before me was a maggot-swarmed, decomposing body curled directly underneath the tree. The smell paired exact with that of the apples. I ripped off the chunks of wood to get a better look at what was left of the face. As I'm pulling up pieces off the body, I see roots of the tree twisting around each limb so tight the sections of the body were ready to pop out of socket. There were even roots pierced through the skin of the torso, digging who knows how far through the organs inside. Once I had pulled enough of the pieces off to see the face, I immediately recognized it from the newspaper article the realtor had shown me. I was looking at what remained of the previous owner. I stood up and dialed 911 before watching the roots slither over his chest and down his throat. I jumped back and watched from a distance as countless tree roots slid out of the dirt and drilled into the body, stabbing into his chest and checkering over him until I could barely see him at all. Then, with a tightening stretch, I watched as the roots sunk the body into the ground, shaking the entire yard around me. The roots pulled down so deep that I could no longer even feel the ground vibrating. My face turns ghost white as I stand far back from the pieces of the apple tree with the phone to my ear, gazing at the motionless ground in front of me. And then I hear a voice. 911, what's your emergency? I mumbled a reply, saying, sorry, no emergency, then closed my phone and cautiously stepped closer to better examine the hole. And just as I suspected, the smell was completely gone.